Jerry, welcome to the Democratizing SEO podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. How you doing?
Very well, thanks. Very well. Thank you so much for your time today. I was looking for someone who I thought would be a brilliant person to speak with around ways of working with SEO. And because I use Riverside, I thought, let me see if there is an SEO at Riverside, and thankfully there is. So thank you so much for your time today. We're going to talk about ways of working with SEO, and I think you'll be a brilliant person to speak with on this topic.
Absolutely.
As I like to do with all my SEO guests, I like to ask them how they got into SEO in the first place. So with that said, how did you venture into becoming an SEO professional? I see you have an extensive experience, so this will be a really fascinating intro.
Yeah, absolutely. So, short version is the fact that I kind of got into, I started building websites like way back at the beginning. I'm not going to lie. My first website was actually built in Word, as in
Oh, wow.
Microsoft Word. And it was so bad. I didn't realize how bad it was until, I kind of started learning about it. I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty bad. Then, at university, I was hosting websites, doing all sorts of bits and pieces, kind of got into building websites with Dreamweaver. Turns out I'm not the world's best designer. I'm not the world's best coder, but I kind of then got into things like data and project management and all sorts of other bits and pieces around it. So I kind of skirted around the edge of doing websites. And you know what it's like. The more that you kind of play around with them, the more you kind of see the problems. So literally, as I'm working away at it, I'm kind of going, oh, okay, I can fix this. I can do that and other bits and pieces. But I think the passion that I had for SEO kind of came when I was doing on-site search I was doing on-site search for the government, actually, basically looking at how people were searching, how people are interacting, the results that came up. And then in my next role, which was doing analytics for a big agency, I then kind of discovered that, we were doing SEO out of the US, but not out of the UK office. And so I was kind of leading on that. And it kind of grew from there. Started kind of going to a lot of conferences, discovered that people were passionate about it. I think the great thing about SEO is the fact that you can never stop learning. And every time I sort of say to myself, you know what? I know I know what I'm talking about. Somebody comes along and kind of goes, did you know this? And right now I know so little about the kind of AI revolution. I don't want to sort of talk just about ChatGPT, but everything. I'm kind of blown away by what other people are doing. So, every time I think I know what I'm doing, someone has come along and said, you know what? Do you know about this? So yeah, perpetual student. And that's why I love SEO.
Yeah, I think AI is pretty much just going to rip up the rule book and essentially start SEO afresh. It's very interesting how I saw the Google I/O a couple of weeks ago, and I found it very interesting how all of it completely relies on users using the SG, search generative experience, and that is what Google is pushing now. And the way technology is moving, it just seems like this in the next 1 to 3 years will be the biggest shift in SEO, in search essentially, that we've ever seen. I was thinking it will be one of the biggest impacts within search. Now I'm convinced it will be the biggest impact in search, just from what I'm seeing happening.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. We're suddenly seeing conversational things like voice. I mean, we've been sort of saying, the year of voice was going to be X, Y, Z, 10 years ago almost.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, I remember basically it was like 2019, 2018 when people kind of go, voice is going to be huge. It's going to be everything. And it's kind of dripped in. And I was team, yeah, it'll just be an input. But now we're starting to see the way in which we can interact with things and have conversations. I really struggle to predict the future right now because I think right now we're going to see this kind of changing more rapidly than anybody can ever have predicted. So yeah, every time I say, oh, this is going to be big, it's almost replaced by the next big thing. I mean, Apple's thing yesterday where they kind of went, yep,
Yeah.
everyone's going to be wearing these ski goggles. I mean, I'm a massive VR AR fan, but I can't see myself strapping on a £2,500 pair of ski goggles and walking around with some kind of vision on the front of my head. But I'm also aware that, when Apple does something like this, often it changes the landscape. So everything is changing. Love it.
Yeah, I didn't see it, Apple's presentation live, but I've seen the headlines around it. And from what I gather, I think they they related it to mobile phones rather than monitors, TVs, essentially your laptop, right? And I think this is where people, there's a lot of conversation around the price points being ridiculously high. But if you relate it to and I think that's because people are relating it to mobile phones. If you relate the product to a laptop, it's on par with laptops and monitors. So you'll essentially have a TV everywhere you go. And that is quite a good product, I think. Of course, the whole idea on 2 hours battery life, that, that's something that will improve as time goes on. But yeah, it's a fascinating product, and yeah.
So I do actually have a pair of sunglasses which are by Nreal or Xreal. They've been rebranded now, and literally I can just put them on, and it'll give me two virtual monitors in front of my laptop. So when I'm flying on a plane or something like that, I can actually lie back, and instead of having a tiny mobile phone, I've got the equivalent of a cinema. So yeah, I'm a total nerd.
Yeah, I can see myself getting the product. Although when the price comes down, or a competitor has a different price point, Apple are known for their high price points. So your experience in SEO, would you say you cover a particular pillar, or do you cover all areas of SEO, or does it depend on what the business needs?
I would say I'm 90 or 80% of a tech nerd. So basically, I'm the guy that kind of looks at the site and kind of goes, yep, this is why Google can't find the content. This is why, it's underperforming in search. This is why the profile over here isn't quite right. There's indexation issues. I could probably tell you. I probably can't, so don't ask me right now. But at one point, I could probably have told you every single response code from Google, from servers and other bits and pieces, what they all meant. And I'm kind of somebody that will dive into the log files or hack things onto our website. In fact, yesterday I hacked things onto the Riverside website using Google Tag Manager to kind of fix a minor problem. So basically, I'm that type of person. I kind of understand how to fix things quite quickly using kind of technical things. In terms of content strategy, that's not necessarily where I focus. So I kind of work with other people who kind of work with me on that. And, same with backlinks. I work with incredible digital PR people to kind of make sure that our backlink profile works to the best it can. So I do focus on the tech side of it. But having been in the industry now for 20 years, I kind of do have a knowledge about pretty much everything. I also know what looks bad. So if somebody kind of goes, this is what we've created, or this is how we're doing something, I'm the guy that kind of goes, no, that won't necessarily work in the eyes of Google or in the eyes of us or the user. So, I've worked a lot of the time with making sure that all of it works together, but my passion is more on the tech side.
And I'm curious to know what the answer to this would be. As someone who's worked both agency side and client side, which do you prefer?
It really depends, which is kind of the classic SEO answer. When I've been agency side, a lot of the time I've had 2 or 3 clients that have been brilliant, who I've worked with brilliant, sort of like done amazing stuff with. I remember when I was leaving my last agency, kind of turning around to a couple of the clients and kind of going, I'm leaving and I'm really sorry almost. It felt like a breakup rather than kind of like a resignation almost. But, equally, when you're working sort of client side, you get the opportunity to kind of go really deep and kind of actually develop those relationships. And, my last role at Oda, for instance, I worked across, the sort of like multiple teams, and the depth and breadth at which I kind of was integrated into these teams meant that I could get things done far better and easier than if I was at the agency, where I'd be speaking to like 1 or 2 people and say, hey, just need to get this fixed. And they'd kind of go, okay, we'll go figure out who we need to talk to. So it's that integration into it that sometimes helps. And again, working client side, I can kind of go, oh, I can just fix that myself sometimes and dive in, fix it, and not stress necessarily about kind of speaking to somebody to get approval or sign off or something. So honestly, it really does depend. It really is like, some clients are great, some in-house employers are great, some aren't so great. It really is. And it will change even, when I was at one company, they basically told me they had a code freeze for like 10 months. And I'm sitting there kind of going, I can't fix anything. What do I do for 10 months almost? All of these problems. So, that was kind of the worst role of my life. But equally, at the same time, I learned a huge amount because I got the opportunity to kind of work with different teams and different companies and different areas to kind of fix things that I couldn't fix necessarily just in the tech SEO field.
Mm. Yeah. And as someone who works client side with different teams, it's very, very different to, let's say, an agency side SEO who has a stakeholder that they liaise with, but that stakeholder has to liaise with the different teams to have things implemented. And with SEO, as you know, you're only as good as you're able to have recommendations implemented. What is it like from your point of view, working with the different teams from an operational point of view?
Yeah, so I've been lucky that when I've been agency side, a lot of the time I've kind of avoided the Chinese whispers by talking directly with the developers and talking directly with people. I remember one of my favorite clients, for instance, I would say, these are the 20 recommendations and, we'd like to get as many of these done over the next month. 2 days later, he kind of messaged me and says, yeah, I've done them all. And I'm there going, I don't quite understand how you did them all because, okay, cool, brilliant. Check them all was perfect. And, I'm there kind of going, brilliant. This is absolutely fantastic. And, I think when a client only pays for a certain amount of time, but you're over servicing them because you can passionately get things done and test and try and things, that's almost the curse of being in an agency. You can over service one client and the client who won't be able to kind of get anything done because it's a hosted solution, or, they've kind of spoken to the developers and they'll get back to them after they've t-shirt sized it in 2 weeks. And so it's quite different. But yeah, back to the question, which I've almost forgotten what it was. Basically working with all the different teams, it's kind of making sure that you understand how they want to work and what their kind of working style is and who they report into, what their goals are. Again, it's often one of the things that I found at Just Eat was the fact that they were all working on so many different things all at once. There were so many wheels spinning. And I found myself trying to understand what they were about to do, what was about to get released, getting myself involved in the testing, getting involved in the speccing out to kind of make sure that we could get things onto the drawing board really early, because we were often doing incredibly advanced stuff like progressive web apps and bits and pieces like that. And me kind of going, okay, progressive web apps are brilliant for SEO as long as we make sure these core basics work right. And just education. I remember basically blocking a release once because if they did it, it would create a near infinite number of URLs. I remember calculating this once and presenting it at a conference, and I still got the number wrong because it was kind of approaching sort of like 20 million basically based on the way in which you could have faceted navigation integrated and overlaid. So what I'm getting at is making sure that you kind of understand and basically make sure that everybody understands where and what is happening with SEO and why it's important that if something gets released, then, it kind of gets checked first. It is much cheaper to fix things before they get released than try to fix a migration or try to fix something that's kind of gone slightly wrong. But that's the job of the SEO. It's basically as much education as it is implementation.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm very happy you said the magic word, in my opinion, education. Because SEO, I find that within the industry, SEO is promoted, or the education around SEO is geared towards SEOs, whereas there's this huge pool of non-SEOs, both from a business leadership point of view and also operationally, that also need to understand SEO. So developers need to understand SEO from a tech point of view. PR needs to understand SEO from a backlink acquisition point of view, off-page SEO, let's say. And there is this thinking that I find that a number of business leaders tend to have, is that they'll have an SEO on board. So that is pretty much it. That's their checkbox. They have an SEO onboarded, and they invest in SEO, but they don't necessarily consider the management of SEO. And I think that is a key area. Why do you think from your point of view, why do you think some businesses get it quote unquote wrong with SEO?
It's this kind of feeling that SEO is almost on autopilot. Basically, that SEO just kind of happens. Whatever happens, it's going to happen because it's almost like this background noise. Paid has kind of got this different relationship. It's almost like we spent this, we got this much back. We spent this, got this much back. And it just kind of works really well in terms of a very direct, calculatable ROI. Whereas in SEO, we know basically that if we spend this much, it's not necessarily we'll get this much back, but we won't lose this much because the competitor is going to gain. Or, it's much more, it's like a running race with everybody else, that we need to kind of make sure that everything that we do is prepared and worked on and going ahead in the right way. And if we take the eye off the ball, I mean, again, when I was at Just Eat, our biggest competitor, I remember looking at them kind of going, if they fixed 2 or 3 things on their site, their visibility would double. And it was basically my biggest fear that right now we were doing very well. But in 6 to 12 months, everything could change with Uber Eats, with Deliveroo, with all these different companies basically able to really smash the market in terms of their PR and profile and other bits and pieces. So it wasn't a case of what we were doing now was going to kind of earn us X amount. It was kind of understanding that we need to stay ahead because at some point soon, the competition will start to kind of heat up. And again, when the competition was heating up, it was kind of understanding that, we weren't doing anything wrong for our ranks to drop. It was more the fact that we were in a race and we needed to kind of constantly be ahead of somebody else to kind of get that traffic, get everything. We relied on a lot of tools, things like Systrix and similar tools to kind of give us an idea of how everybody was doing. But ultimately, it was nearly impossible for us to kind of truly sort of predict what was going to happen, especially when Google then makes a change, which kind of says, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to integrate the restaurants into our knowledge panel in such a way. And then, if you click a button, you can order straight from the restaurant, and similar bits and pieces, similar happenings. So it's as much about staying on top of everything than it is about anything else.
Yeah, I always say SEO, you can look at it you can bracket it into 3 different areas. What one does internally, what the competitors do, and Google updates or algorithm releases. The latter 2 are out of your control. A big chunk of what is within your control is what you do internally. But unfortunately, a lot of businesses treat SEO as a channel that's reactive. So they let something happen, i.e. their search rankings or even traffic. They let it either dwindle, fall, or completely regress, and then they take action to address the problem. And I find that is a very unfortunate way to perceive SEO, and it's the way that I would say is the norm, I would say is the default way that people treat SEO. Whereas if you're more proactive with SEO, you can prevent things from happening in the first place. So you you wouldn't be able to prevent, Google from creating their algorithms. They're going to do their thing. Competitors, you don't have control of them, but within your control internally, you can prevent losses from happening. And the way to prevent that, in my opinion, is to have education across the board with all departments, teams, and even individuals that have the ability to impact your performance, organic performance. Where do you think that balance is between training people to understand SEO, to be more aware of SEO, yet not being an SEO professional?
Yeah, so going back to both Oda and at Just Eat, one of the things that we did was we made sure that when any engineer or anybody who's writing front-end code and product managers to a certain extent came on board, they spent a little bit of time with me and I shared with them some kind of core information. One of my favorite tools at Odo that we used a lot was Content King. And the reason I say that is the fact I could share them with a link which kind of went, these are all the problems you've just created. Not quite like that, but these are all the problems that I see, and, can we get these fixed up? And it was a really easy way for me to share a link to something which said, this is a bunch of problems. But at the same time, I often need to kind of explain to them real basics about SEOs, for instance, how a link works, how internal linking is so important. And, this was an education piece. Again, I was lucky that my boss at Oda was kind of quite vocal across the business, and she was very influential. So we often did big sort of sessions, and we got everybody from the growth team, for instance, to kind of implement like a short presentation on what we were up to, why it was important, or tell a story about something that had happened. So I remember sort of telling a story about one recipe, about how it was seasonal and how when it went through the ranks, how the click-through rate changed and how all of these sort of things happened. And, me, by the way, this was like me talking about a website in Norwegian. So all the time kind of joking about the fact that I had no idea what this kind of lamb curry was actually all about, and getting feedback from the audience and sharing how seasonality was so important. So, again, it's as much about entertaining and educating and everything like that. But at the same time, you can't expect everybody within a business to kind of fully understand the implications of what's happening. So it's very much kind of being at the right place at the right time, having the right conversations with people, teaching them that, if Google can't find a page, then it won't generate any traffic. If we update something, Google has to kind of see it's been updated. All of those bits and pieces. And it's very much kind of a fundamental part of it, just kind of the basic education that, make them think how a search engine works rather than explain to them why I want this to be 302'd over here and not 301 and why I want this to have a canonical tag like this and why the internal tracking parameters are kind of causing a few issues. Basically, if I can explain to them, just let me have a look at it. I'll explain to you the problem. You don't need to know all the kind of problems. There's a million things you can screw up. You don't need to know them all. I will happily go through and review everything just to make sure that what you've done is fine. Just kind of give me a shout beforehand. So, again, things like page speed is one of the biggest issues. It's amazing how often a web page goes live and you think to yourself, nobody's checked this for page speed. Nobody's checked this for, those kind of problems that Google says, we don't like this. So yeah, it's kind of important to make sure that SEOs are treated as much as part of the testing, as part of the strategy, part of the product, as part of the engineers and part of the marketing. It's kind of a weird place for us to sit across so many different fields.
Yeah. SEO is definitely more than a marketing channel, isn't it? How do you think, how do business leaders respond to this whole idea of SEO being a very educationally focused area within their business?
So business leaders are fun. They often seem to have a knowledge of SEO, which is kind of interesting because a lot of the time they've grown up or they've kind of been in smaller businesses where SEO is important, and they've often been educated by people. But they often get it slightly wrong, or they've got a kind of a 10-year-old view of it. They've often had somebody come in from an agency who's basically sold them on the links package or the gold package or something. And they've kind of still got that idea that, they'll buy links, they'll fix the metadata, and they'll go to the top. They'll be number one for a keyword or key phrase that often is a vanity phrase, and they're kind of often obsessed with rankings. So they often have a very different interpretation or idea of what actually is happening. Whereas we're kind of going, actually, we want to make sure the long tails are performing. We want to make sure that the way in which people are actually really searching for the product or the service is just happening in that kind of organic way. So it's kind of very much a case of the re-education, but slowly. And again, business leaders are often time poor. I've had so many meetings where I've had 20 minutes to explain and get buy-in on something, and they've turned around and said, "Yep, that's fine," or nope, just that's not quite in line with what we're working on at the moment, or the cost is too high for this. So it's often a 20-minute session, and trying to understand the fact that in those 20 minutes you've got to kind of explain exactly what you need as much as what it'll do is kind of totally critical.
What should SEOs then be providing business leaders? I find that an area that SEOs are quite poor in is presenting to business leadership. I mean, operationally, we can sort of like find our way around, but from a business leadership point of view, we tend to either get too stuck in the details, and business leaders not interested at all. They don't want to, it's almost as though we're trying to train them in the way that we've been trained to be SEOs. So we're providing them too much information, too detailed information. And as you mentioned, they're time poor. They just need the overview, right? So what sort of information should we be sending to them or providing them?
my only argument with that is every single one of them is different. So what I mean is that, you know, the amount of times where I've kind of gone, okay, they basically want a one pager where I don't go into the detail. They kind of go, I kind of explain the problem, explain the solution, explain how I'm going to do it and why I'm going to do it. But then I also get some which are either from an engineering background or they're from an SEO background, actually, occasionally. And they want the actual detail. They want to be able to kind of look at it. They want to see that you've done your homework and done it right. And so it's kind of a case of understanding who you're presenting to as much as the fact that, you know, you can't bucket them all at once. But inverted pyramid is my kind of approach. Basically, you have that kind of one single slide or two or three slides, which is, you know, this is what I want to do. This is why I want to do it. This is how much it's going to cost. And this is the output. And one of the things that I've often joked about in SEO is bad maths. Basically, we kind of say, oh, if we do this and the click-through rate's this, then this will come out like this. And I know, you know, every SEO person out there knows that doesn't matter what you predict, it's never going to be like that. You know, click-through rate curves are often completely different on a keyword basis, on a brand basis, on something. So, you know, I remember when I was working at Oda, an agency came in and said, you know, at the moment you rank 2 for this, if you rank 1 for that, you'll get this amount. And I remember kind of going, actually, your click-through rate curve for that one keyword is so wrong that it kind of screws up all of the calculations. But I appreciate the fact that you've done the effort and I'm not going to pick you up on it. And it does make a difference, basically, if you kind of go in with a bit of bad maths and kind of go, look, you know, this is what we've done and this is what we think the impact will be. They're not going to question the maths. They know that, you know, SEO isn't kind of a precise science. It's not like paid, which also isn't a precise science, but you know what I mean. Basically, you can't sort of kind of say, we know what we're doing. But as long as you kind of have the data and say, if we rank number 2 for this keyword, this is how much more traffic we'll get. Based on our calculation, this is kind of the revenue impact. That works a lot better than going and saying, yeah, we want to fix some stuff. The challenge with there is backlinks. If you're trying to purchase or acquire backlinks, acquire backlinks, basically that's where it kind of is a bit more creative in terms of the maths. It's very hard to say, actually, if we increase your backlink profile, this will happen. Because two things happens. One, you're in constant competition with your competitors. And secondly, it just doesn't work in that kind of linear way. You know, we know that if we get great backlinks, our rankings improve. We just never know how much and by which backlinks are going to have the most impact. And it's often surprising because it's all down to relevance and trust that Google doesn't really share the full details on.
Yeah. I remember many years ago where SEO was synonymous with link building. That is pretty much all agencies sold. This was pre-Penguin, right? And I think SEO was a lot easier for people to grasp then because they can literally quantify in terms of cost per link, right? So we pay X amount and our SEO will improve. And I find that a lot of SEOs, from their point of view, saw it as an easy win as well until Penguin came about, and then the entire thing had to shift into different areas. And I find that that quantifying aspect became lost again. It wasn't as easy. And then things such as keyword data being removed from Google Analytics, for example, that again made it more difficult, right? But all of that, from my point of view, made SEO a lot more elaborate. It expanded it to the point where I think it's better off now because it's harder to quantify. But internally, if you can have that confidence, if you can garner that confidence in SEO, I think that's what business leaders really want. They don't necessarily want to know the details. Of course, as you mentioned, it really depends on the type of business leader, but generally they want to have that confidence that they're confident in what you're doing. So whatever is happening within SEO, they want that confidence that you're on top of it and they're in good hands. And one of the things that I think will change all of that is AI, as we mentioned earlier. Because AI is now completely changing the way we're going to be informing business leaders. When I think of what business leaders think of SEO, I think they think of keywords, rankings, and links. And those three things are going to change, especially rankings. It's going to be more difficult to quantify actually the CTR if we're number one is going to be this. It's going to change all the time, especially with generative experience in place. How do you then think, what sort of confidence then do you think business leaders will have in SEO, considering SEO is changing more radically than PPC?
I honestly haven't got a great answer yet. I mean, the reason I say that is because it is literally changing so fast right now. I mean, me trying to predict the future from a month back was impossible almost. But, at the end of the day, I'm hoping that Google Bing is already giving you a lot more kind of data apparently from how and which ChatGPT is integrated. I've not looked into it, but I'm kind of been having these conversations. Google will have to start giving us kind of just enough information for us to want to kind of engage with it. So we are a bit nervous that our content, for instance, we produce great content. Google's going to come along, consume it and repurpose it and present it back to users as kind of like de facto information that Google has, and without any attribution, without any links. And if the information is gotten from Google's page and we don't get the traffic, will we still want to produce the content? And there's so many questions going on at the moment that we're having kind of an interesting time discussing. I think in the future, we will kind of have to understand this much, much better. But right now, we're kind of questioning exactly what SEO will look like in 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months. In terms of the business trust, I think one of the things that we know is the fact that it's not so much that we will be SEOs like we are today, but we will be organic growth consultants or organic growth experts or whatever the term is in the future. As we kind of know that, we're looking at this faster and sharper than anybody else. We understand what the page looks like, and we understand how to get the content from it. Right now, for instance, video is becoming so important. Images are so important. Product search is so important. Entities is so important. And this is going to carry on in the sort of like the search kind of landscape for the near future. We know that we need to make sure that all of these things are important now because they're going to be even more important in the future. So don't have a great answer. I just think that we need to kind of be more and more technically specialist. At the same time, we need to kind of understand all of the areas of SEO and all the areas of kind of the user experience that's coming up, whether it's AR, VR, generative, everything. I think it's going to be something which is going to be an interesting ride for the next 12 months.
I think this is the beauty of SEO in that we are, if there's any channel that focuses on all areas to do with the website, it's SEO, right? So even if we're, SGE changes the landscape, to the point where it's now impossible to quantify organic, rankings from a blue links point of view, there'll still be other areas that we can have an impact. So we know the type of contents that will have an impact on a page. We know the different templates that have impact, whether it's a PLP, PDP, all of these factors SEOs consider. So even though changes nigh, I don't think there is a fear that SEOs need to have. It will change, but I think change for the better. I think the expansion is the key.
Yeah, I think it's critical that we stay up to date. I mean, every time I go to a conference, I'm trying to find out those people who, and it's often there's the couple of people who have kind of really dived deep into it. There's a guy called Danny who's doing some amazing stuff with ChatGPT. There's Lily Ray who's kind of really looking at the results. There's all of these people out there, and having those conversations with them, not necessarily while on the stage, but with a beer later on, where you kind of ask them, well, you said this, but that's not what I'm seeing. And often, their confidence on stage and what they kind of say to you afterwards, they kind of go, yeah, well, we're sort of seeing it too. But, this is the kind of the view that we've got right now. But, we know this is changing. We know this is happening. And having those conversations keeps you slightly ahead of the curve. And like I say, I don't feel as ahead of the curve as I'd like to be, but I don't think anybody is right now. There's a few people out there who are kind of playing around with it all. A few people are becoming real experts, but honestly, I have no idea exactly what to kind of study next, except for the fact that we've got to get really, really hands-on with it all and really get confident with it all. And, there's going to be courses coming out. There's going to be conferences coming out. There's a great one in Bulgaria called Take It Offline, which I'm running. And that one will be kind of really good fun. And I'm hoping to make sure the conversations there are focused around, what do we need to learn? What do we need to be? Where do we need to go? But, I'm hoping these will be the conversations rather than the expertise on it.
I have a suspicion around it, and from what I've been studying, I've been very, very focused on it for the last 6 months now. I think the whole idea of having, the left rail on the SERPs being recommendations and the right rail being facts, i.e. knowledge panel, I think that will merge, and the knowledge panel will be more important. The whole idea of entities, and Google understanding one's entities, entities, I should say, as facts will be what to use to drive, AI, and what to use to acquire the facts, the true AI, rather than, fake news about, a brand or a topic.
Yeah, my favorite example on that one used to be Marvel. If you ever search for Marvel, you got no actual blue links for. It was subjected into, sort of categorized into all of those different ways in which you're kind of looking at the page. It would have the characters, it would have the movies, it would have the series, it would have shopping, it would have all of those different elements that made up the page. None of it was kind of a classic blue links type of thing. And particularly on a mobile, this was so dynamic. And I've been using that as a kind of core example for 5+ years. So as you say, basically Google's going to be taking this information, integrating it into what it's got, meshing it all together. And the days of 10 blue links are definitely more behind us than ever before right now.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that is leading into more non-SEOs understanding more about SEO. Essentially, SEO will be, I think, better integrated within different departments. I have another suspicion, which is off-page SEO will be prominent again within the industry. Content and technical for the last couple of years has been forefront. I can see technical taking a back seat to off page and then content. What are your thoughts around which pillar or area will be more important, let's say, in the coming years?
Yeah. So I think you're right about the fact that off-page will be important, but not necessarily off-page in the conventional backlinks and do follow links, but how you're talked about, how you're mentioned as an entity.
Yep.
So, if I do a search for a brand or something and making sure all of the way in which it's spoken about me is kind of positive, or at least the way we want it to be. So we encourage people to speak about it. I hate the words influencers and other bits and pieces, but yeah, influencers and that side of thing will be so, so important. It'll be critical that we make sure that we're talked about everywhere, wherever there's a listicle, wherever there's a element, wherever somebody's kind of talking about something. You're either the data provider or part of the data. So yeah, I think SEMrush were calling this surround sound at one point at the last conference about a year or so ago. But we've been talking about this subject for a long, long, long time. That you can't get all 10 blue links. So make sure that, the reviews about you, all of those different things, all of the TripAdvisor reports, anywhere that you're basically going to be featured, make sure that you are featured as positively as possible. And so you're not necessarily worried just about controlling your one single website, but you're kind of trying to manipulate, sounds bad from an SEO point of view, but you're trying to influence and positively impact how you're being spoken about. Lots of companies do this incredibly well. SEMrush, again, is kind of a good example. They basically make sure that they're integrated into reports as a data source. They're spoken about everywhere. Systrix as well. They do the same thing. They kind of make sure that they give data to the right people at the right way. All of these companies are doing this kind of very sort of approach where they are the data source. They are sort of spoken about. They are becoming recognized as the source of the information. And when you come to a product or something, so, we've talked about Apple's weird new VR headset thing. I think it's going to be important that they make sure that they're spoken about everywhere. When somebody lists which are the VR headsets to buy, or even if I don't even they call them VR headsets, but you know what I mean. Basically, if you're kind of in a list, make sure you're featured there, because that's where your users will be looking. They'll be looking in all sorts of different places. I mean, whenever I buy something from a website I've not heard of, I immediately kind of look at whether or not the website has kind of got good reviews in Trust Pilot or something like that, because I don't necessarily always trust everything.
Yeah. It's all of this changes within the ecosystem, online ecosystem, also translates internally as well. What I mean by that is, I'm sure you can see, you can look at a website and say, okay, this site, I have a suspicion that the team internally are not very collaborative. You know, you can see that this area of the site is optimized, this area is not. Perhaps there are two different stakeholders and they don't necessarily talk to each other. Or perhaps SEO is isolated rather than integrated within different areas. How would you suggest SEOs become more integrated within teams or departments?
I'm going back to Just Eat. I did find that there were so many different teams working on so many different parts of it. I mean, it's one of those things that we laughed about earlier, the fact that, you know, it's the most complicated 6-page website, because at one point there was only really 6 different templates almost, but there was almost a different team for each template. And, you know, there was a payments team and there was all of these different teams. And whilst SEO shouldn't necessarily be integrated into the payments team, what we did discover was there were opportunities there to kind of go, okay, well, actually everybody's searching for PayPal and Just Eat. So let's make sure that we'll give them the information to sort of say, you know, can you take it, and other bits and pieces. You know, each team had a different remit, a different focus, a different, like, you know, a KPI almost, but fundamentally it was all about conversion. So kind of making sure that I could speak to them about whether or not everything kind of worked together in a better way. I mean, a bit of history, I actually worked on the BBC homepage for quite a while, actually, for about 6-12 months. And I remember finding it interesting that, you know, all of the different parts of the BBC website were very, very disconnected almost. And yet the BBC site search ran through so many of them, powering them in different ways, which we were actually replacing at the time, and kind of understanding what was being powered by what and how everything was put together. It's one of the most interesting things of any website. And again, going back to Oda, where I was at the supermarket, I remember basically sitting down with a whiteboard with a guy called Phil Collins, actually his real name, and another guy who had been there a while, and kind of going, this is how I think the website's put together, and drawing it out on a whiteboard. And he looked at me and went, not bad. And then basically corrected half of it and just went, yeah, this isn't actually what you think it is. This is over here, and this underpowers this, and this looks like this. And so immediately then we started putting names against it. And then once we got like the product managers and the technical managers and all sorts of bits and pieces, I could start to kind of go, okay, so this works like this. This is over here. And then often I would have quick meetings with 2 people or 3 people from those different teams, and always get someone in from InfoSec, for instance, if you're dealing with something which is kind of across different bits and pieces, because often they're the people that will spot odd behaviors and other bits and pieces. So what I'm getting at is, you know, it's often the SEO's job is as much about developing those relationships with different people and getting them actually speaking to each other in the right way to make sure everything works across. And this improves things like page speed. One of my favorite weird examples is a number of websites which has caused jQuery from multiple different files in multiple different ways across 10 different parts of the website. So every time someone goes to a different page in a website, it loads up a different version of a script, which is a megabyte, and it's all downloaded again. But, you know, if everyone was on the same kind of code base, things would be faster, things would be smoother, things would be better. And again, it's down to, it's not the SEO's job necessarily to kind of facilitate that, but it's often we're often the people that kind of speak to people and say, hey, by the way, we spotted this and this and this are different. So if we could just get that fixed, and often it's fixed in the next code release. So magic happens quicker by kind of going, we can save the user 6 megabytes on every journey by just making sure this and this are tied up. But yeah, it's a challenge. And one of the things you'll often find is there's a part of the site that nobody seems to own or nobody takes responsibility for. And that is often the fun part. Have you ever been on the O2 website?
I have,
Like if you've got a mobile phone and you've got O2, sometimes you're browsing around and you get into a part and it says, by the way, you need to use Internet Explorer version 4 to use this part of the site or something similar. And you kind of go, but has nobody ever looked at this? Or you get a part that says compatibility or something, advice for the phone. And each part of it is ridiculously out of date to the point where you think to yourself, nobody owns it. And you know full well that somebody internally is kind of going, does anybody own this? Because everybody probably has seen it, but it's just nobody's job at that moment.
Yeah. I find the dynamic between teams within the business to be fascinating. I'm someone who's very interested in IO psychology, and I find that because SEO is new within the marketing industry as a whole. Even though it's not the newest, I mean, social media is newer than SEO, but SEO is the one channel that's seen as, it has a reputation of being a black art, black magic type of industry. And because of that, it's almost, treated as the newest, marketing channel and the hardest to integrate within different, ways of working. What one thing do you wish business leaders knew about how to manage SEO within their business?
So the biggest problem I've seen is the undervaluing of it almost. It's that kind of classic case that it's only really obvious when it goes wrong almost. I've worked with a number of clients, freelance clients over the years where they've brought me in because it's gone wrong rather than anything else. And I kind of ask them, oh, well, who was managing SEO before, or what was happening before? What's the history of it? And, they sort of say, oh, it was Frank from marketing who does PPC and does this and does that. He kind of did it. And you have a conversation with him and he sort of completely admits basically that he got it kind of lumped under his remit, but it wasn't his thing. He sort of turns around and says, well, actually, this was what happened. We knew that it was a risk. We said it was a risk, but the sort of senior management kind of said, oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Just handle it almost. And then suddenly when it goes wrong, Frank is in the firing line and he turns around and says, well, I sort of said we needed this or that. And suddenly it sort of doesn't happen. And again, I think that's one of the biggest issues is the fact that a lot of people who have got into SEO have got into SEO by being promoted up from being something slightly different. They've almost become the head of SEO or something without kind of an SEO background or enough of an SEO background. And they're kind of learning it by managing an SEO agency. And the worst people to manage an SEO agency is often the people who don't know anything about SEO, because it feels like you're playing Chinese whispers with somebody and they'll get excited by the fact that you've built 10 links from Vogue, when actually what you're really happy about is the fact that you've solved the crawl issue with the sort of massive internal links issue. And this is going to really kind of boost their ability to get their pages crawled or their page speed has improved so much that the conversion rate will have doubled. But if the person comes from a background which doesn't have that kind of same value of SEO, it's sometimes interesting. That said, I would say that there are a lot of in-house SEO people who have somehow not come from a classic SEO background, but have learnt it incredibly well. And the conversations that I've had with other in-house SEO people leave me blown away by just what they're up to and how they're doing it. So, I don't want to kind of criticize in-house SEOs. It's just a lot of the time there isn't somebody who's the in-house SEO so much as he's the guy who's been made responsible for it.
Yeah. I find that is the case a lot of the time. It's just being tagged onto one's existing roles. However, within businesses that have SEO as a forefront channel, there is this understanding that, SEO is very important, but within the business. And I'm curious, do you find SEO is best? How can I phrase this? Do you think SEO is over a business, or is it business first and then SEO? What I mean by that is, SEO's agency side. They're very much focused on SEO, the industry, and they focus on best practices and have best practices and bring it to businesses. Whereas SEO's client side, they tend to be more aware of their business and incorporate SEO within their business. So which is it for you? SEO over business or business over SEO?
Business over SEO every time. I mean, basically, the amount of times where I've kind of looked at like a recommendation from somebody and said, we can't do that. That'll cost millions of pounds to kind of do because of the way in which, well, not millions, but so much to do. And the ROI on it will be terrible. Or vice versa, that, they undervalue something. And I'm thinking to myself, you're very focused on the 1,000 pages over here, which aren't bringing in revenue, but those 2 pages there, that's absolutely critical. We need to make sure these 2 pages are brought up to the top. We need to focus so much on these 2 pages or something similar. So a lot of the time, the SEO agencies are far more focused on things like traffic and rankings, when in-house you're kind of focused on actually will it sort of make some revenue. It is a challenge from an external point of view because all we get access to often is Google Analytics, or we get access to limited amounts of data. And even when we ask for it from the client, it's almost like they expect us to kind of fully understand their very niche business. I mean, one of the things that I was surprised at when I was selling insurance once a long time ago was the fact that we make a loss on every single sale in the first year. But, we expect people to stick with us for 2 to 3, 4, 5 years, and then we make money from them. So it's almost kind of understanding the business models behind everything and whether or not it will be revenue generating or whether or not it'll be something that just kind of works. My weird example from the supermarket was the fact that, our top selling product was cucumbers. We ranked number 1 for cucumbers. Nobody ever searched for a cucumber and then bought a cucumber because that's just not how journeys work. You will be basically looking for something else, maybe a bottle of whiskey or something. And then you'll kind of go, oh, actually, I also need a cucumber. Everybody always buys a cucumber, or at least a lot of people do. So what I'm getting at is that despite it being our top seller, despite us ranking number 1 for it, nobody ever searches and buys a cucumber by typing in cucumber into Google, or at least not in the supermarket sort of data that I had. So what I'm getting at is I focus so much on trying to figure out what actually is turning into new customers. There's this kind of North Star metric that a lot of businesses kind of have, which is we want to get more of this. For instance, one place it's like repeat customers, one place it's new customers, and it's often different in different cycles of the business. Understanding how kind of growth works through the business means you kind of get a much better idea of kind of what you need to do to kind of help the business move along and also make your boss and everybody else happy. I mean, sometimes ultimately your job is making everybody else happy in the business because they know what's kind of going to keep them employed and moving forward. So if somebody says, actually, what I really want is nobody to call up the helpline, then you can turn around and say, okay, well, let's make sure that, we're not going to remove the helpline number, but we're going to make sure those 20 FAQs are really easily findable, searchable, and on that page. So as you reduce the calls that are, is my order late? Where is my order kind of calls? And you kind of really improve on bits and pieces from that way. So business first, always, every time.
Yeah. Completely agree. Lastly, Gerry, if SEO was a person, where would you say they are in their life? Let's say age-wise or experience-wise.
42.
42.
It's the answer to everything. Basically, it's a Hitchhiker's Guide reference. But basically, it does feel like you've got to have enough experience to kind of really understand how everything goes together. And I was kind of having this conversation actually on Twitter a couple of days ago that, one of the things that I find with young people nowadays, oh God, did I say that? I sound old. But basically, a lot of people getting into like digital marketing now have no idea how a web page is put together, titled sort of like the basics of head and body and CSS and JavaScript almost. It just kind of happens. It comes out of the box from WordPress or whichever CMS solution they've got. And it feels like a lot of the time their knowledge of actually how this works impacts their understanding of how Google works. What I'm getting at is, little bit of life experience, kind of being a bit old actually helps. And, having that kind of life experience really does help in terms of understanding how to kind of communicate it and how not to screw up certain bits and pieces. And having life lessons is great. One of the things I would say is I've been constantly impressed by very young people in the industry who are demonstrating incredible advances and insights and technologies and ways of working, which I feel is a testament to us old folks teaching them in the right way, or at least I hope so. But yeah, it is a good time actually at the moment in terms of the industry maturity, but it's going to be interesting to see how it changes over the next 18 months.
Yeah. Hopefully more expansion. Expansion is, I think is great for the industry. Gerry, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find you online?
So best place is on Twitter, which is Dergal, which is DERGAL. Weirdly enough, if you just search for Gerry SEO, I come up number 1. So I'm quite proud of that. And yeah, if you want to find me anywhere else, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me at Riverside as well, riverside.fm. And also I've kind of run a small conferencing, which is going to be launching a new event very soon. And that's going to be takeitoffline.co.uk.
Awesome. I'll have those links in the description so people can get in touch with you. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Gerry. Have a brilliant day, and we'll catch up again another time.
Brilliant. Talk to you then.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye now.